never to hear again in his life. It was the sound of a hunter drone powering up. Jace lowered his voice to a whisper as he stepped forward. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his words soaked in calm despite the danger slicing through the air. Mira clutched Lyra's hand as tightly as she could, her small claws digging into her sister's skin as the fear inside her rose like a cold tide. Lyra didn't flinch, she only held Mira closer while her glowing markings brightened faintly, reacting to the approaching threat in a way she herself did not fully understand. The metallic tunnel seemed to narrow around them, the walls groaning softly as the echo of mechanical limbs grew sharper, rhythmic, deliberate, closing the distance inch by inch. Jace took one silent step forward, then another, until he reached the edge of a curve in the tunnel. He pressed his back against the wall, his breath steady but deep, his senses alive in ways only danger could awaken. Slowly, he peeked around the corner and saw it. A sleek black hunter drone crawled through the darkness like a metal spider, its segmented limbs clinking against the ground, its central eye glowing blood red as it scanned the tunnel for heat signatures and movement. A restricted species tracker, designed specifically to find escapees like Lyra and Mira. It emitted a shrill pulse that bounced against the metal walls, searching for them with deadly accuracy. Jace pulled back instantly, his jaw tightening as he turned to the girls. "We need to move now," he whispered. Lyra nodded quickly, lifting Mira to her feet as the younger girl bit her lip to keep from crying out. The three of them began moving deeper into the tunnels, careful and quiet, but the drone's pulse grew louder, sharper, angrier. It had detected something, maybe the warmth of their footsteps, maybe the faint glow from Lyra's markings, maybe the soft breath Mira couldn't hide. Whatever it was, the drone knew it wasn't alone in the darkness anymore. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber filled with broken cargo crates and shattered mechanical parts scattered across the floor like bones. Jace guided the sisters behind a stack of metal plates, gesturing for silence as he crouched beside them. The drone entered the chamber moments later, its red eye sweeping across the space, its legs tapping rhythmically like a countdown to disaster. Mira trembled uncontrollably, her fear overwhelming her ability to stay still. Jace gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady, silently promising her that she wasn't alone. Mira looked up at him with tearful eyes, and his heart clenched painfully at the trust she placed in him. Lyra watched the drone with silent terror, but something within her shifted as she stared at the glowing red eye, her markings pulsing faster, her breathing deepening, her senses sharpening in a way she didn't expect. She whispered softly, "It is tracking us by our light." Jace turned to her, his voice low but urgent. "Can you dim it?" he asked. Lyra swallowed hard and tried to focus, her small body shaking as she pressed her hands together, concentrating with all her strength. The glowing lines on her skin flickered like dying embers, then dimmed to a faint shimmer. Jace nodded, grateful, even though he knew dimming the glow wouldn't fully stop the drone's sensors. The drone paused, its red eye narrowing as if sniffing the air, before suddenly turning in their direction. It emitted a piercing alarm as its limbs unfolded and prepared for attack mode. Jace didn't wait. He grabbed a broken metal rod from the ground and charged from behind the crates with a fierce determination that surged through him like fire. The drone lunged at him, firing a burst of crackling blue energy that grazed his arm and sent sparks across the metal floor. Jace swung the rod with the force of a soldier who had nothing left to lose, smashing it into the drone's joint and knocking it off balance. The drone screeched, recalibrating as its limbs skittered wildly. But Jace didn't stop. He struck again and again, each hit fueled by the memory of what would happen to the girls if he failed even for a second. It retaliated with a sharp blade that extended from its side, slicing across Jace's sleeve and grazing his skin. Blood warmed his arm, but he ignored it, grabbing the drone's mechanical limb and twisting it until the metal snapped with a loud crack. The drone convulsed, sparking violently before its red eye flickered and finally went dark, its body collapsing into stillness at Jace's feet. He stood there breathing heavily, his arm bleeding, sweat rolling down his face, but victory burning in his eyes. Lyra and Mira rushed to him, Mira throwing her arms around his waist in relief, while Lyra looked at him with awe and a growing emotion she had no words for. "Are you hurt?" Lyra whispered. Her voice trembling, Jace shook his head lightly, brushing it off even though the wound stung sharply. "I'm fine," he said. "We need to keep moving before more of these things come." Lyra nodded, stepping closer to him as if she feared he might disappear if she blinked. Mira held tightly to his hand, trusting him completely now. And as the three of them stepped deeper into the unknown tunnels, Jace felt the weight of what lay ahead. The Authority would send more drones, more soldiers, more hunters, but the girls stayed close to him, their fragile footsteps echoing in unison with his own, bound together by fear, survival, and a rising bond shaped in the shadows of danger. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the tunnels and the mountains of scrap, something else had begun to move, something that sensed the awakening of a destiny that none of them yet understood, something that had been waiting for Lyra and Mira for far longer than this night. The storm around them was growing, and they were now at the center of it. The deeper they moved into the tunnels, the heavier the silence became, as if the darkness itself was listening to their footsteps, weighing their presence, deciding whether to let them pass or swallow them whole. Jace kept Lyra and Mira close as they navigated through narrow passages that twisted like veins beneath the dying world above, his wounded arm throbbing with every step. But he forced himself to ignore the pain because slowing down meant giving the Authority time to tighten its net around them. And he could not afford even a breath of hesitation. Mira clung to his uninjured arm while Lyra walked beside him with steady steps, her eyes glowing faintly as her senses guided them through the labyrinth of forgotten machinery and ancient rust. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber that stretched into the dim horizon, a graveyard of derelict ships and cargo crafts piled on top of one another like fallen giants. Broken engines jutted out from the ground, metal wings lay scattered like torn limbs, and shattered hulls creaked under the shifting weight of scrap, torn apart by years of abandonment. Mira gasped softly, overwhelmed by the vastness and eerie quiet, while Lyra stepped forward cautiously, her markings shimmering brighter in the stale air. Jace scanned the environment with practiced eyes, noting the faint glow of old landing beacons, the collapsed control tower in the distance, and the narrow path leading toward the only working structure left, a half-buried smuggler's port built during the old wars, forgotten by the governments but remembered by survivors like him. "That's where we're going," Jace said softly. Pointing toward the port, Mira nodded nervously, gripping his hand tighter as if the towering shadows around them were alive. Lyra looked around the scrapyard with a quiet intensity, sensing something Jace couldn't see. "There are memories here," she whispered, her voice drifting through the cold air like a fragile echo. "Painful ones." Jace didn't ask what she meant, not yet. He just kept moving, guiding them through twisted wreckage as the wind howled through the broken metal structures, sounding like distant cries of the forgotten. Halfway across the scrapyard, a low hum vibrated through the ground, the kind of hum that meant one thing: a ship approaching. Lyra and Mira tensed immediately as Jace pulled them behind a skeletal engine frame, crouching low as he scanned the sky through the cracks of torn metal wings above them. The hum grew louder, deeper, too heavy for drones, too metallic for patrol cruisers. It was a smuggler ship, a large one, drifting in slow circles as if searching for someone or something. Mira buried her face against Jace's shoulder, her small body shaking as she whispered, "Are they here for us?" Jace shook his head gently. "Maybe, maybe not," he murmured. "But we can't be seen." The ship descended lower, its engines glowing a muted blue as it hovered above the scrapyard, the dust around them swirling into spirals that glowed under the ship's shadow. Jace's heartbeat quickened, memories of ambushes from his soldier days crashing back into him like a familiar nightmare. He braced himself, preparing to run if needed, but Lyra's hand touched his arm suddenly, her golden eyes widening with certainty. "They are not Authority," she whispered. "Their heat patterns are wrong. Their energy core is old. This is a rogue craft," Jace blinked, realizing she was right. The engine's signature was mismatched, the flight pattern sloppy and the glow inconsistent. Whoever they were not military. The ship finally settled on a flat patch of metal and powered down, the ramp lowering slowly with a hydraulic hiss as dust scattered across the ground. Jace kept the girls behind cover, watching every movement with caution. A moment later, a tall figure in patched armor stepped out, his helmet reflecting the dim scrapyard lights. Jace narrowed his eyes. Something about the man's posture felt familiar, the way he scanned the surroundings, the slow, measured steps of someone who had lived long enough to. The night market of Zarthan 9 breathed like a living monster, its neon lights flickering through thick toxic fog as crowds moved in restless waves. And in the middle of that chaos walked Jace Rowan, a tired human soldier who had nothing left except the 12 credits in his pocket. His boots felt heavier with every step, not because of weight but because of the ache in his chest, a quiet reminder of all the battles he had survived and all the people he had failed to save. He came to this market to trade scrap metal for food. Nothing more, nothing heroic. Just survival on a world that hated humans as much as humans hated it. But fate never cared about plans, it moved on its own. And tonight it whispered to him through a sound soft enough to be ignored by anyone else but loud enough to shake his heart completely. It was a cry. Not of a creature but of a person, a trembling, frightened sound that cut through the metallic clatter and angry shouts of the vendors. Jace slowed down, turning his head toward the direction of the sound. And that was when he saw them. Behind a rusted cage with glowing red bars stood two small cat alien girls. Barely in their early teens, their fur matted, their bodies bruised, and their eyes wide with terror. They clung to each other so tightly it was as if they feared the universe would rip them apart if they loosened their grip even for a second. The butcher beside them laughed with a deep, cruel tone as he placed a price tag on the cage. A tag that read meat. Jace felt something twist painfully inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not since the war ended and left him hollow. It was the same instinct that made him shield wounded soldiers on the battlefield. The instinct that once defined him as a protector before life turned him into a wanderer with no purpose. He should have walked away, he told himself that repeatedly. Humans weren't allowed to interfere with restricted species, and these girls were obviously one of those forbidden kinds. Buying them was a crime. Saving them was suicide. The butcher made that clear as he sharpened his metallic carving blade, its edges glowing under the market lights. The older girl, thin and trembling, slowly lifted her head. Her golden eyes met Jace's gaze, and in that moment the world around him fell silent. He didn't see an alien. He didn't see a creature for sale. He saw a terrified child asking for help without using a single word. Jace took a breath that tasted like burning metal as he stepped forward. He felt the weight of every law he was about to break, every danger he was about to invite, every risk that would drag him into hell again. But some moments define a man, and this was one of them. The butcher noticed him and sneered. "Human, this ain't a pet shop. Move along unless you're buying meat." The girls flinched at the word, their ears lowering as their small bodies pressed further into the corner of the cage. Jace stared at the butcher, then at the cage, then at the tiny, trembling hands of the younger sister, and something inside him snapped in a way he could not reverse. "I'll buy them," he said, his voice steady but burning inside. The butcher laughed loudly, the kind of laugh meant to mock weakness, but he didn't refuse the sale because money was money, even if it came from a desperate human with nothing. Jace placed every last credit he had on the table, the small metal discs clinking against each other, echoing louder in his ears than the shouts of the market. The butcher unlocked the cage, grabbing the girls roughly before shoving them into Jace's arms. Their bodies were cold and trembling. He felt their fear like a pulse under their skin. "Good luck, soldier boy," the butcher sneered. "They'll die anyway, you just paid to watch it happen." Jace ignored him. He wrapped his coat around the girls as they looked up at him with a mix of confusion and desperate hope. He didn't know what to say, he didn't know how to comfort them, but he held them gently as he whispered, "You're safe now. I promise, even if that promise could cost him his life." He carried them through the narrow alley behind the market, their fragile bodies pressed against his chest, the younger one sobbing quietly, while the older sister stayed silent, her golden eyes scanning the darkness like she expected danger to jump out at any moment. As they reached an abandoned cargo station, Jace set them down gently and checked the shadows for threats. His heartbeat pounded like thunder in his ears because he knew what he had done was not just illegal, but unforgivable in the eyes of the trade authority. Unauthorized purchase of a restricted species meant execution, no trial, no appeal, no mercy. Jace turned back to the girls kneeling in front of them. "Can you understand me?" he asked softly. The older sister nodded slowly, surprising him. "I am Lyra," she whispered in a shaky voice. "This is my little sister Mira." Mira hid behind Lyra, peeking with frightened blue eyes that reflected the dim lights of the station. "They were going to cut us," Mira whispered, her voice breaking into a sob. Jace felt a cold fury rise in his chest, stronger than fear, stronger than caution. It was the fury of a man who had seen too much suffering and refused to let more happen in front of him. Before he could answer, distant alarms echoed through the market, flashing red lights spreading across the sky. Authority enforcers were sweeping the area, scanning for illegal purchases. They would find the butcher's sale record any minute, and when they did, the hunt would begin. Jace grabbed Lyra and Mira's hands and whispered urgently, "We have to move now." The girls nodded, trusting him without knowing why. Trusting him because he was the only one who had shown them kindness in a universe built on cruelty. They ran into the shadows as the alarms grew louder, and the night of Zarthon 9 swallowed their footsteps, beginning a story that none of them were prepared for, a story of danger, destiny, and a human soldier who refused to let innocence be slaughtered again. The alarms grew louder as Jace pulled Lyra and Mira deeper into the maze of abandoned cargo crates, the red lights flashing across the metal walls like angry pulses from a living machine. The air tasted like smoke and rust, but Jace kept moving, gripping the girls' hands tightly as if letting go would mean losing them to the dark forces closing in behind them. Mira stumbled every few steps, her small legs shaking from exhaustion and fear, while Lyra tried to stay calm for her sister, even though her own breathing trembled with every breath she took. Jace felt their fear through their touch, and it pushed him to move faster. His instincts sharpened in ways he hadn't felt since the war. He knew what it meant when the authority sounded a sector sweep alarm. It meant someone had broken a law important enough to send armed enforcers immediately, and it meant anyone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time would disappear forever. He reached a rusted storage unit hidden behind stacks of broken containers and forced its door open, dust falling in heavy clouds as he ushered the girls inside. The space was dark, filled with old crates, wires, and broken equipment, but it was shelter, temporary as it might be. He let the door slide shut behind them, plunging the room into a dim glow from a single flickering strip of light that barely held on to life. The girls huddled near a corner, Mira gripping Lyra's arm so tightly that her small claws left faint scratches. Jace knelt in front of them, his voice low and gentle. "You're safe for now, but we have to be quiet." Mira nodded shakily while Lyra kept her eyes on him, studying him with a depth no child should have learned at her age. Jace tried to calm his racing thoughts, but every second his mind replayed the butcher's mocking laugh and the way those children had trembled in that cage. He had acted on instinct, on heart, not logic, and now reality was closing in around him like a tightening trap. He dug into his coat pocket and pulled out a small can of water ration, offering it to them. Mira drank quickly, her hands shaking while Lyra sipped slowly, her golden eyes never leaving his face. "Why did you save us?" she whispered, her voice softer than the hum of the failing light. Jace froze for a moment, struggling for the right words. "Because no one else would," he said finally. "And because I couldn't watch what they were going to do to you." Lyra lowered her gaze, a mixture of confusion and gratitude crossing her expression, as if she wasn't used to kindness, as if the universe had never offered her anything except pain. Outside, heavy metal footsteps echoed through the alley, followed by mechanical clicks and the crackle of radio static. Mira whimpered softly and pressed her face into Lyra's shoulder. Jace leaned closer to the door, sensing movement, his muscles tensing like coiled wire ready to snap. Through the cracks, he saw the enforcers moving in precise formation, their armor reflecting the red emergency lights, scanners sweeping the ground for heat signatures and illegal life forms. If they scanned this storage unit, it would be over. Jace turned back to the girls, signaling them to stay silent. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if the enforcers would hear it through the metal walls. Minutes felt like hours until the footsteps finally faded into the distance, leaving only the distant wail of alarms behind. Jace exhaled slowly, his breath shaking with the relief of surviving a danger that had been a hair's breadth away. Mira crawled into his arms without warning, her tiny body trembling uncontrollably. "Are they gone?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "For now," Jace replied, wrapping an arm around her gently as Lyra watched with careful eyes, as if trying to understand why a human would hold her sister with such tenderness. "We can't stay here," Lyra whispered. "They will look again and again, until they find us." Jace nodded because she was right. The authority never gave up, especially when money or forbidden species were involved. He moved toward the back of the storage room, pushing aside crates until he found what he hoped was still there, a hidden maintenance hatch that led into the old cargo tunnels beneath the market. Tunnels forgotten after the new trade lanes were built. Using a metal rod, he forced it open, a rush of cold air spilling into the room like the exhale of an ancient beast. "We're going down," he whispered, helping Mira climb into the narrow tunnel before lifting Lyra down. He followed them, lowering the hatch behind him until darkness wrapped around them completely. The only light came from a faint blue glow leaking off the faint markings on Lyra's arms. Patterns Jace hadn't noticed before, mysterious and almost alive, like soft bioluminescent lines pulsing with each heartbeat she took. "What are those marks?" he asked quietly as they moved through the tunnel. Lyra hesitated, her voice barely a breath. Our kind is born with them. They help us sense danger. They help us understand things others cannot. Jace listened carefully as he carried Mira on his back while Lyra walked beside him. Keeping close, the tunnels echoed with dripping water and distant vibrations from machinery above, but their path remained hidden, safe for now. They will not stop hunting us, Lyra added, her tone filled with a wisdom far older than her years. And now they will hunt you too. Jace didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. Then they'll have to catch me, he said softly, a spark of defiance lighting his voice. And I don't plan to die tonight. Lyra looked at him differently then, with trust forming slowly in her eyes, trust she had never given anyone before. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, Jace pushed open a grate and stepped into the cold night beyond the city walls. He looked back at the girls, their fragile figures standing in the moonlit darkness, and he knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than any of them could imagine. The stars above them shimmered with silent promise, as if the universe itself had started watching their story, waiting for what came next. And as Jace took the first step into the unknown with Lyra and Mira beside him, he whispered to himself that no matter what hunted them, no matter what laws he broke, he would not let those children fall into darkness again, not while he still had breath in his body. The cold air outside the city walls wrapped around Jace like a warning, sharp and biting, carrying the distant hum of patrol ships sweeping across the skyline behind them. Lyra and Mira stayed close at his sides, their small silhouettes trembling in the moonlit darkness. The world beyond the walls stretching out like an endless void of abandoned land where danger hid behind every shadow and silence carried its own kind of threat. Jace adjusted the straps of his worn pack and pulled Mira higher onto his back as she clung to him, like he was the only anchor she had left in the universe. Lyra walked beside him quietly, her golden eyes glowing faintly as she scanned the terrain with uncanny focus, as if her instincts were guiding her through places she had never walked before yet understood deeply. The ground beneath them was cracked and uneven, littered with the remains of old transport lines and collapsed structures from forgotten wars. Jace kept moving, relying on his memory of survival routes he had used during his soldier days, though those days felt like a lifetime ago now. Every time the wind blew, Mira tightened her grip around his shoulders, hiding her face against his neck, her breath warm and unsteady as her fear pulsed through her body. Lyra noticed and placed a gentle hand on her sister's back, whispering soft words in their native language, a soothing melody that calmed Mira even though Jace could not understand its meaning. He watched them with a tightening chest, realizing how fragile and strong they were at the same time, children who had been forced to grow up long before they should have. A distant rumble shook the ground under their feet, and Jace instinctively pushed the girls behind a fallen cargo hull, his eyes narrowing as a search cruiser glided overhead, its bright spotlight slicing across the wasteland like a blade. The mechanical whirring grew louder, and Jace held his breath, pressing a finger to his lips as he hovered protectively over the girls. The cruiser slowed, scanning the area, and for a moment the pale beam lingered dangerously close to their hiding spot. Mira dug her claws into Jace's jacket in silent panic, while Lyra held her sister close, her eyes squeezed shut as she tried to control her trembling. After several tense seconds, the beam moved on, and the cruiser drifted further into the distance until the hum of its engines faded completely. Jace finally released the breath he had been holding, the air shaking in his chest. "We can't stay out in the open," Jace whispered, helping the girls up as they resumed their journey across the wasteland. "Once they widen their search radius, this whole area will be crawling with enforcers." Lyra nodded, understanding the danger better than anyone. "There is an old cargo port near the Scrap Mountains," she said quietly, surprising Jace with her knowledge. "Poachers used to pass through there. It has tunnels and hiding places." Jace looked at her, studying the certainty in her eyes. "You're sure?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then nodded again. "I felt it," she whispered, tapping her faintly glowing markings. "I don't know how, but I felt the path." Jace didn't argue. Something in her tone made him trust her instinct without question. They traveled through broken ridges and metal ruins until the silhouette of the Scrap Mountains rose before them, towering piles of discarded machinery that formed jagged cliffs under the pale moon. Jace scanned the terrain carefully as they approached, noticing fresh scorch marks on the ground, signs of recent skirmishes or perhaps bandit activity. His grip on Mira tightened protectively as he led them into the twisted maze of metal. The mountains groaned with every breeze, the rusted structures shifting against each other like tired giants. Mira whimpered at the eerie sounds, but Jace whispered softly to calm her, his voice gentle in contrast to the harsh world around them. They found the entrance Lyra had spoken of, a narrow gap between two collapsed cargo engines, leading into a dark cavern of scrap and shadows. Jace ducked inside with the girls, the air thick with dust and metallic scent. The place felt abandoned yet strangely alive, as if secrets slept beneath the metal layers. "Stay close," Jace murmured as he guided them deeper inside. His footsteps echoed in the hollow chamber, mixing with the soft patter of the girls' feet. Mira clung to his hand while Lyra walked ahead slightly, her glowing markings illuminating the path with a faint, haunting blue light that danced across the walls like moving stars. Eventually they reached a small chamber sealed off from the outside wind. Jace checked every corner, every shadow, making sure it was safe before letting the girls rest. Mira sat down gratefully, curling up against Lyra's side as exhaustion began to weigh down her eyelids. Lyra gently stroked her sister's hair, humming the same soft melody she had whispered earlier, a sound filled with ancient sorrow and fragile hope. Jace watched them from a short distance, his heart heavy with emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "You were born in captivity," he said quietly, half asking, half realizing. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting loneliness older than she was. "We never knew freedom," she said, her voice trembling. "We only knew cages, darkness, fear, and the sound of others being taken away and never returning." Jace felt a sharp pain in his chest, the kind of pain that came from memories he wished he could forget, memories of war, loss, and helplessness. "You won't go back," he whispered suddenly, his voice steady and filled with a conviction that surprised even him. "Not while I'm still breathing." Lyra looked at him long and deeply, her golden eyes softening for the first time since he met her. "But they will hunt you too," she said. Almost in a whisper, Jace shrugged lightly, though the weight of the truth pressed heavily on him. "I've been hunted before," he said. "I know how to survive." Lyra nodded slowly, and for a moment the air around them felt calm, as if the universe paused to witness the quiet promise forming between them. But peace never lasted long in worlds like this. A faint metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, subtle yet unmistakable. Jace's hand went immediately to his sidearm as he pushed the girls gently behind him. His heartbeat sharpened, his senses heightening as he listened to the shifting air. Someone or something was inside the old cargo port with them, watching, waiting, moving closer with each slow echo of metal against metal. And as Jace stepped forward to face whatever lurked in the darkness, he felt the beginning of a new storm rising around them, a storm none of them were ready for but would have to survive together. The metallic clang echoed again, deeper this time, vibrating through the hollow scrap-filled chamber like a warning from something that should not have been awake. Jace froze, his hand tightening on the grip of his sidearm, the cold steel steadying his nerves even as his pulse hammered against his ribs with fierce urgency. Lyra pulled Mira close, her trembling hands wrapping protectively around her sister's shoulders while her golden eyes fixed on the darkness with growing fear. The air shifted in the tunnel, carrying a faint mechanical whir, a sound Jace recognized immediately from the war, a sound he had prayed to be both dangerous and weary. When the man removed his helmet, Jace's breath caught in his chest. It was Varric, an old war ally, a man Jace had fought beside in battles he wished he could forget, a man who had saved his life once and disappeared years ago into the underworld of smugglers and mercenaries. "No way," Jace whispered, disbelief shaking his voice. Lyra looked up at him, sensing the shift in his breath. "You know him?" she asked softly. Jace nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know him," he murmured. "And that might save us or destroy us." He made a decision and stood up from cover, guiding the sisters into view. "Varric," Jace called softly. His voice echoed across the scrapyard. Varric's head snapped toward him, shock flashing in his eyes before he stepped forward. "Jace Rowan," Varric muttered, disbelief mixing with caution. "I thought you were dead." Jace gestured at the girls beside him. "Not yet," he said. "But we will be if you don't help us." Varric's gaze shifted to Lyra and Mira, his expression tightening as he recognized the species. "You should not have taken them," he said heavily. "The authority will kill you for this, Jace." Jace already knew that. He felt the weight of that truth every second since he had lifted the girls out of the butcher's cage. "I didn't take them," he replied quietly. "I saved them." Mira stepped closer to Jace, half hiding behind him as Lyra faced Varric with a quiet, resilient stare. Varric looked at her markings, At the faint glow beneath her fur, and his expression darkened with understanding. "They are not normal captives," he said. "They are high-value targets, so valuable that every hunter in the sector will come for them." Jace took a step forward, his jaw clenched. "Then help me protect them," he said fiercely. "Help me get them somewhere safe." Varric hesitated, torn between survival and loyalty, between risk and guilt. His eyes softened as he looked at Jace, a man he once trusted with his life, a man who now carried 2 trembling children behind him. Finally, Varric sighed, a deep sound of someone accepting a burden he knew he could never put down again. "Get them on the ship," he said quietly. "We leave now." Relief washed over the sisters' faces as Jace ushered them toward the ramp. But just as they reached the entrance, a sudden explosion burst through the far end of the scrapyard, sending a shockwave of dust and fire through the air. Lyra screamed as Mira clung to Jace. Varric's face hardened instantly. "The Authority found us," he said grimly. "And they're coming fast." And as the burning horizon lit up around them, Jace realized they had run out of time, and the real chase was about to begin. The blast lit up the scrapyard like a dying star, sending a wave of heat and trembling metal across the ground as Jace shielded Lyra and Mira with his body, the force hitting him like a hammer and stealing the breath from his chest. Mira clung to him as though the explosion itself might pull her away, while Lyra pressed against his side, her golden eyes wide with terror and glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Varric grabbed Jace's uninjured arm and shouted through the ringing in their ears, "Get on the ship, now!" His voice trembling with urgency as smoke billowed upward in violent spirals. Jace lifted the sisters onto the ramp and pushed them forward, guiding them inside the old smuggler craft as the ground shook beneath their feet. The alarms on the ship flickered to life, red and angry, warning of incoming hostiles as Varric sprinted to the cockpit. Jace followed close behind, keeping the girls pressed against his side as the ramp began to rise, sealing them inside just as a rain of laser fire swept across the scrapyard, scorching the metal hulls and erupting in blinding sparks that danced against the ship like furious stars. Mira's small body shook violently as she buried her face against Jace's chest, her muffled sobs trembling through his armor. Lyra stayed near him, but her eyes were fixed on the ship's walls, sensing every vibration, every shift in energy, every threat closing in like invisible claws. "It's them," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The hunters are here." Jace held both sisters close as the ship roared to life, engines shaking the floor beneath their feet with a deep, thunderous rumble that promised both salvation and danger. Varric shouted from the cockpit, "Hold on!" As he pulled the thrusters forward, the ship lurched violently, shooting upward through smoke and collapsing metal, the force pressing Jace and the girls backward as the ground dropped away beneath them. Through the narrow window, the world below looked like a storm of fire and shadows. Authority trooper ships rising from the wreckage with their bright spotlights slicing through the night like hungry blades. The smuggler craft shook as plasma fire shot past them, one bolt hitting the left wing and sending a jolt through the entire ship that made Mira let out a frightened cry. Jace pulled her closer, steadying her trembling body as his own wound burned with sharp pain. Lyra placed a gentle hand on the injured arm without saying anything, her touch warm, steadying, almost soothing in a way that eased his breath for a moment. But the danger outside grew louder, thicker, more suffocating, as Varric fought to escape the tightening web of enemy ships surrounding them. "They're trying to lock our engines," Varric shouted, sweat sliding down his brow as sparks flew from the control panel. "If they hit us again, we're done." Jace moved instinctively toward the cockpit, keeping the girls behind him. "What do you need?" he asked firmly. Varric didn't look at him, his eyes locked on the swarm of ships following them. "I need power to the shields. But the main conduits are fried. Someone has to reroute them manually from the lower deck." Jace didn't hesitate. "Tell me where." Varric pointed toward the hallway. "Down there, second hatch, but hurry. They're locking missiles." Jace turned to Lyra and Mira, dropping to one knee in front of them. "Stay here, stay together, don't move," he whispered. Mira grabbed his hand in panic, shaking her head. "Don't go. Please don't leave us," her voice cracking with fear. Jace placed a gentle hand on her cheek, his heart twisting at the desperation in her eyes. "I'll be right back," he promised softly. "I swear it." Lyra met his gaze with trembling resolve, her golden eyes filled with fear yet burning with trust. "Be careful," she whispered. Jace nodded once and ran toward the hatch, the ship shaking violently as the enemy closed in. The lower deck was dim and filled with vibrating metal panels that hummed like an angry beast ready to tear itself apart. Jace ripped open the second hatch and dropped inside, his boots hitting the grated floor with a hollow clang. The conduit panel sparked dangerously as he reached it, smoke curling upward in thin blue trails. He grabbed the emergency lever and pulled with all his strength, his injured arm sending lightning bolts of pain through his muscles, but he refused to stop. With a final heave, the lever locked into place and the ship's shields burst to full power with a deep roar that echoed through every wall. Above him, the engines screamed, the ship jolting upward as Varric broke through the enemy formation. The sudden acceleration almost threw Jace off balance, but he grabbed a support beam, pulling himself up as the hatch above opened and Lyra's desperate voice called out to him, "Jace, come back." He climbed up as fast as he could, slamming the hatch shut behind him just as another bolt slammed into the outer shields, sending a violent tremor through the ship. Lyra rushed to him the moment he emerged, her hands touching his arm, his jacket, as if to confirm he was still alive. Mira ran into him next, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist with a sob of relief that cut straight through his chest. Jace held them both, breathing hard as Varric shouted from the cockpit, "We're breaking the blockade." The ship lurched upward again, pushing through layers of turbulent air until finally, mercifully, the dark clouds of Zarthan 9 fell away and the stars opened before them like an endless river of light. But the danger did not fade. Varric exhaled shakily as he adjusted the navigation. "They won't stop chasing us," he said. "Not with what those girls really are." Lyra looked down, her markings glowing in soft pulses as she whispered, "We need to tell him." Jace looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. "Tell me what?" he asked gently. Lyra lifted her gaze, her golden eyes shimmering with a truth she had carried alone for far too long. "We are not just sisters," she whispered, her voice trembling with secrets heavy enough to reshape destinies. "We are the last heirs of the Narali clans, and the hunters want us because our blood can change the fate of galaxies." And as Jace stared at her in stunned silence, the stars beyond the window seemed to hold their breath, as if the entire universe had been waiting for this moment to unfold. For a long moment Jace couldn't speak, the revelation floating in the tight air of the cabin like a whispered prophecy that changed the weight of everything he had done. Lyra's golden eyes held his with a mixture of fear and ancient sorrow, as if she expected him to step back, to regret saving them, to abandon them now that he finally knew the truth. Mira pressed against his side, clutching his jacket with trembling hands as if the universe might tear them apart the moment he let go. But Jace didn't step back. Instead, he reached out and gently touched Lyra's shoulder, grounding her with the steady warmth of his hand. "You're still just kids," he said softly. "It doesn't matter what blood you carry, you needed help. And I wasn't going to leave you." Lyra's breath caught in her throat, her eyes shimmering like breaking starlight. Mira let out a shaky sigh as she buried her face against his chest. Varric turned from the cockpit, staring at them with a heavy expression that carried both awe and fear. "The Narali clans were wiped out decades ago," he said quietly. "If these girls survived, then the hunters will never stop chasing them. Their bloodline could shift power across entire sectors." Jace tightened his hold on the sisters, his voice steel beneath the softness. "Then they'll have to get through me first." As the ship glided through the silent sea of stars, Lyra slowly pulled away from Jace and sat across from him, her markings glowing in slow, rhythmic pulses. "Our people were known for seeing more than others," she whispered. "We could sense patterns, futures, dangers. We could feel when the universe was changing." Jace watched her closely, the faint blue shimmer of her markings reflecting in his eyes. "Is that how you knew where to go?" he asked. "How you sensed the tunnels? The scrapyard, the danger?" Lyra nodded, her fingers tracing the glowing lines on her arms. "It's getting stronger," she whispered. "Ever since you touched us. It feels like something inside us is waking up." Jace didn't fully understand, but he listened, because the fear in her voice carried a truth deeper than any explanation. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," he said firmly. Mira climbed into his lap again, curling up like a frightened kitten as the stars drifted past them. "I'm scared," she whispered. Jace wrapped his arms around her, brushing her hair softly. "I know," he murmured, "but you're not alone anymore." Lyra watched them with a tenderness she tried to hide, her expression softening in a way she didn't understand, a way that felt both frightening and comforting. The peaceful moment ended abruptly when Varric cursed under his breath, slamming his hand onto the control screen. "We've been tracked again," he said sharply. "Long-range scanners are picking up an authority cruiser. They're gaining fast." Jace's jaw tightened. "Can we outrun them?" Varric shook his head. Not for long, this ship isn't built for speed. We're carrying too much weight. His eyes flicked briefly to the sisters, guilt and frustration battling across his face. Lyra leaned forward, sensing the shift in the ship's energy. They're coming because of us, she whispered, but Jace shook his head firmly. They're coming because they're monsters, he said. You're not the cause. You're the victims. The cruiser grew larger on the display, its massive engines burning like pale suns as it closed the distance. Varric adjusted the ship's trajectory, weaving through asteroid debris in a desperate attempt to shake them. But the cruiser matched every maneuver with mechanical precision. Jace braced his stance as the ship shook violently from sudden turbulence. Mira clung to him with terrified sobs while Lyra steadied herself against the wall, her markings glowing brighter, faster, pulsing with a strange energy that lit up the dim cabin like soft blue lightning. Then something shifted in the air, a subtle vibration that Jace felt before he fully understood it. Lyra's eyes unfocused as she lifted her hand slowly, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. I can feel them, she whispered. All of them, the hunters, the soldiers. Their minds are pushing forward like a storm, but I can feel something else too. Jace moved closer, his voice steady. What do you feel? Lyra shivered. I feel a place, a safe place far from here. Somewhere hidden, somewhere old, I don't know how I know, but I can sense its pull. Varric looked at her sharply. Are you saying you can navigate us? Lyra nodded slowly, her voice shaky but confident. If you trust me, Jace didn't hesitate. We trust you, he said. Varric adjusted the controls. Give me the coordinates. Lyra stepped closer to the console, her hands hovering over the screen as her glowing markings pulsed in perfect rhythm with the shifting stars outside. There, she whispered, her voice threading through the hum of the engines like a fragile melody. Follow that path. Varric punched in the coordinates, and the ship lurched into a new trajectory, the engines straining as they redirected toward an uncharted region of space. The cruiser fired at them, a burst of plasma striking the rear shields with a violent shockwave that sent Mira screaming, and the ship shaking like a wounded beast. Jace grabbed the wall to steady himself, shielding the girls as sparks rained down from damaged wiring. Shields failing, Varric shouted. If this path doesn't work, we won't survive another hit. Lyra stepped forward with trembling legs and placed her glowing hand on the console. It will work, she whispered. I can feel it. The enemy cruiser closed in, preparing to fire again, but just as the blast formed, the smuggler craft shot forward, slipping into a narrow Starstream corridor that had remained invisible to normal scanners. Light bent around them, sound warped into silence, and the cruiser vanished behind walls of cosmic dust and fractured starlight. The ship glided into the hidden stream, shaken but alive. Carried forward by a path only Lyra could sense, Jace looked at her with awe and gratitude, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and wonder. Mira leaned against him, exhausted from crying and shaking, while Lyra met his eyes with a trembling smile that held more emotion than words could express. The stars outside shimmered like a new beginning, a new hope, a new destiny forged by a human who refused to give up and two alien princesses who refused to die. Together they had escaped death, but the world ahead waited with secrets they had not yet imagined, and a future none of them were ready for.